All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Looks like people are flowing in. So we'll go ahead and get started with some housekeeping items. We're really excited everyone's here with us today. We're here with Carrie Sikowski and Chris White presenting the Presales Tech Stack. This webinar is a part of the Scaling Presales Webinar Series presented by Consensus. My name is Sammy Focarino, and I'm the Senior Events Manager here at Consensus, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Consensus is intelligent demo automation software that helps scale presales with interactive video demos. You can learn more at goconsensus.com. If you didn't already know, we're bringing the biggest event in presales, DemoFest, live and in person in 3 different cities this year as DemoFest X. We would love for you to join us in one or more of the cities listed here. To register for any of these events, you can visit goconsensus.com/DemoFestX. I'll also post the link to register in the chat. All right. We encourage you to participate in today's webinar. Our hosts will answer any questions at the close of the event, but you're welcome to post your questions at any time through the Q&A box on the right side of your console. If at any time you're having technical difficulties, press the help button on the right side of your screen. We're excited to be here today with Chris White and Carrie Sikowski. Chris White is the author of the acclaimed The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers, founder and CEO of Tech Sales Advisors, and host of the LinkedIn Live program, Tech Sales Advice. Carrie Sikowski is the founder and president of Presales Mastery, helping presales organizations improve their demo performance through personalized one-on-one coaching using a comprehensive 95-metric demo performance best practices framework. Chris and Carrie are the co-authors of the recently released Presales Buyer Guide, which makes them especially qualified to speak on this topic. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the rest of the time over to you both.
Thanks so much, Sammy. Folks, welcome. Chris White here, obviously, with Carrie Sikowski. When we did this a few weeks ago at DemoFest, I think I opened with, actually, I'm just the account manager in this conversation. And I just want to thank all of you for joining. I'm going to hand it over to my sales engineer, Carrie Sikowski, who's going to do all the heavy lifting. But I feel like maybe that's lost a little bit of muster. So Carrie, instead, can I just share my screen and maybe we can just do a quick poll for the folks that might be with us? Are you good with that, Carrie?
Perfect. Kick it off. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that very thing. So hopefully you all can see the Menti code there. I'll invite you to use your phone if you care to scan the QR code. And in fact, Sammy, if I put a chat, I'm gonna put a link in the chat. Will everybody see that?
Yep. Let me go ahead and right now it looks like you just sent it to the panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into everyone.
Okay.
So that just came through
Thank
for
you.
everyone. Everyone should see
So
that.
folks, if you care to join us on the Menti poll with your browser, you can click the link that Sammy just shared. You can, of course, also use your phone to scan the QR code. I will pause the screen so the QR code will stay up. But the first question, if you've already joined, the first question is, what best describes your role? Are you a pre-sales quote individual contributor? Are you a pre-sales leader? Are you in sales, sales leader, marketing, or other? I see about 16 or 17 responses. I'm gonna leave the code up for just another minute, and then I'll share what I'm seeing. All right. So far we've only had about 16 people respond to the poll, but completely in the pre-sales category with a heavy emphasis on leadership, which is fantastic. Next question then. What best describes the organization that you represent? Are you a pre-sales vendor or are you a pre-sales quote buyer? So far we have vendors in the group. So very interesting to see that. Okay, so Carrie, and we've experienced this before, Carrie. We've had a number of the vendors actually join a number of these calls and a number of these sessions. So good to know. So this only applies to a few of you. For those of you in the buyer category, have you already made an investment in pre-sales automation? Yes or no? We have our a vote, a couple, so very good. Interesting. So it's balancing out a little bit. Very, very interesting. And then the final question that I'll ask at the moment, for those of you in the buyer category, are you considering an investment in pre-sales automation? Yes, within 6 months, yes, within 12 months, or no, or not sure. Very good. Okay, so we have an interesting mix in front of us. Very good. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, super. Carrie, I'm going to hand it back over to you, sir. I know we've got a few slides that we'll share and get into the prepared material.
Excellent. All right, bear with me here for a second. Can everyone see my screen? You should see title slide.
We've got you. I'm not sure I recognize those two younger looking gentlemen in the slide, but we got you.
Social media, use your best picture at all times. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So quick agenda for today. As some of you may know, I'm a big stickler for agendas. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what our view at a very high level is of the technology market and sort of why we decided to sort of start this pre-sales buyer's guide in the first place. We'll discuss what we saw as sort of the top challenges facing pre-sales organizations today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about our view of the pre-sales tooling and solution landscape and how we sort of segmented that as part of our buyer's guide to help leaders sort of better understand how to view it and where to sort of direct their investment dollars. We'll talk a little bit more then about the actual guide itself and the process we took and what's included. If you haven't seen it yet, you'll learn a little bit about it. And then it is totally free to access, so you can go check that out after this webinar. And then we're going to get into what probably might be more interesting for most of you is some of the key observations that we've seen as we've gone through this process and both before and after we release the guide in talking to not just the vendors, but a lot of pre-sales organizations that are either buying or evaluating or have bought these solutions and their experiences. So that's what we'll do, and we'll wrap up with a little bit of Q&A at the end. All right, so I think we'd probably all agree it is a really exciting time to be in pre-sales right now. Clearly, the market forces has shifted, and way more companies now recognize the value that pre-sales brings to both the sales team and the broader organization as a whole. And I think that has definitely helped drive this explosion in demand for pre-sales, which has exacerbated the well-known deficit of talent that we seem to have in this marketplace. It's hard to find people. And helping to address that problem, though, and a lot of other challenges, there has clearly been a seismic increase in investment in solutions that improve pre-sales performance and automation. And while there have been a few that have been around for almost a decade, the majority of the vendors in this space have only really hit the market in the last 2 or 3 years. It is a fairly nascent space. But with so many new vendors and the fact that many of the vendors have focused on maturing their products necessarily over substantial marketing spend to get their name out there, two things were pretty evident to us as we sort of started this exercise around designing the guide. One is that there's sort of overall market and vendor awareness is somewhat spotty, right? It is improving absolutely with the help, of industry coverage from things like our guide and companies like G2 adding a new pre-sales category, which is exciting. But that being said, there are new vendors that continue to pop up almost monthly. So the space is clearly changing quickly, and not everyone's easily able to keep track of what's going on. There's also a bit of a lack of clarity around what exactly each of the vendors does. And I think part of that is that this is a very highly evolving market. Not only are new vendors coming in, but each vendor is pretty rapidly adding new capabilities to their solutions. So it's often unclear exactly which ones address which use cases that we might be looking to solve in pre-sales. And then to top off that whole problem, pre-sales historically hasn't really been tasked with evaluating and choosing solutions to help with their problems. We are new to this, right? We're the solution people, and so we tend to create our own solutions and have made do that way. But now that we've got options, it's a bit of a new experience for us. And so pre-sales leaders that are looking to improve their teams face a couple of challenges, right? Now that you have options to improve your team, where should you look to invest in? And what are the use cases that each of those particular areas addresses? And what benefits are you likely to see if you do make those investments? Similarly, once you make the decision on where you're going to invest, what are your options? Which vendors are there that are worth evaluating? And finally, as you engage with them, right, because we haven't historically purchased a lot of software for ourselves, what are the questions and considerations that you as pre-sales leaders should be thinking about in order to make an informed decision? So today we're going to discuss a little bit about what the market looks like in the context of how we approach the topic for our buyer's guide. And that was released 2 months ago in April. You can find it at presalesbuyersguide.com. All right. So we're going to talk now a little bit about some of the big challenges that we saw pre-sales organizations facing, and that we tried to sort of encapsulate as the use cases in the buyer's guide. So let's start off with a few here. So whether it's from poor or sort of lack of adherence to sales engagement methodologies, or limited or no qualification or discovery, or even things like misalignment or broken relationships between sales and pre-sales, a large number of demos that are delivered are to unqualified prospects. That wastes scarce pre-sales time, puts a huge strain on effectively scaling our teams. And as most of us are probably pretty well aware, it's a pretty pervasive problem. In fact, in Consensus's last workload and comp report, workload and compensation report, they said over half of organizations reported that 30% of their demos were unqualified. So it's a big problem. Then we ran into this situation around sort of inadequate demo infrastructure. And most of us can probably relate to these types of challenges. We in pre-sales rarely control the infrastructure where we're creating our demo instances and our demo environments. So we're reliant on other departments to set up and maintain those critical environments. But the problem is those other departments, whether it's cloud or ops or IT, whatever it is, aren't often aligned with us in terms of the priorities that we put on setting those environments up and the timing with which they need to be up. Right. And so we often have to incur long lead times to get new stuff set up. And that doesn't match sales' sense of urgency. Right. And then there's the other challenge there around sort of demoing from production and shared environments that often have much more rigid controls in place. And that can prevent a lot of demo flexibility, like showing unreleased features or easily customizing our demo models and data to fit each of the prospects' needs. Right. There's also the ever-present challenge of scheduled and unscheduled downtime that can lead to unreliable availability of those demo instances. So consistency around both the presentation and the demo delivery is also often a challenge, where teams are usually switching control of the presentation, as Chris and I just did, between multiple people, and also alternating between slides and one or more applications. And what that typically leads to is some disjointed delivery with different user interfaces. And we also have the common challenge around how to effectively represent multiple end user personas that today are typically accomplished with either different browsers where we can be logged in with separate accounts at the same time, or using incognito windows. But doing all of that makes our solutions appear more complex to the buyer. Right? And if we add to that the fact that there's often a lack of a standardized set of demo assets, right? That frequently results in a proliferation of a whole bunch of siloed models, demo models, where each SC is necessarily presenting a totally different experience than their peers, not necessarily a lot of consistency there. So for platform and middleware and other solutions where there's not an obvious interface to demo, clearly illustrating how those solutions work and the value that they provide can be a challenging task. And it's often done through static slides and flowcharts that are usually either too high level or too confusing for buyers to easily comprehend. So that's another challenge that some of these solutions are addressing. So, it's more important than ever to enable our buyers on their terms rather than selling to them on ours. Most of us are well aware of this tidal change in buying habits, where prospects are now only directly engaged with sellers for as little as, I think Gartner says, 17% of the sales cycle. And buying teams are continuing to grow in size, which requires our sellers to reach a much broader set of people with a broader set of diverse needs. And aside from the most user-friendly solutions, most solutions tend to be too complex to simply hand over the keys and let buyers take a test drive without properly training or restricting functionality or other things that restrict what they can do with your tool, none of which appeals to the buyers themselves. They want to get hands-on as quick as possible with no excuses. So when we think about most of our buyers, they're unsophisticated software buyers. They don't do it very often. And because of that, they're often unable to understand how a generic demo example or use case is going to apply to their own unique situation or approach. And so it's imperative upon us as pre-sellers that we customize our demo models and our messaging to each of these prospects to make the demos more relevant for them. Unfortunately, most solutions were designed to be used, not to be demoed. And so customizing each demo often is too onerous or time consuming, and that further exacerbates the SE bandwidth issues. And so solutions that can help with that will make a big difference as well. Chris, you want to take a few of these other ones?
I mean, I don't know, Carrie. You're on such a roll. I was inclined to just let you keep going, but yes, of course, I'll take a few. By the way, I see a few comments in the chat. In particular, Brendan and Tommy. Thanks for that feedback. It seems like one of the questions I asked early in the poll, which is, are you a pre-sales vendor or a pre-sales buyer? That was a little bit misinterpreted. So yes, what we meant by that is, are you with one of the companies that sells a solution for pre-sales, or are you in a pre-sales role and you would be, quote, one of the buyers of these, of these solutions? So anyway, for future reference, Carrie, probably something that we need to, be a little bit more clear on. But sort of continuing on with these ideas around challenges, the challenges that Carrie just stepped through and talked through largely build to this one the need to scale, right? Because the resources are strained, because of inadequate demo infrastructure and just disjointed customer meetings. We need the ability to do more with less. We need to automate where we can, eliminate low value tasks. In fact, one of the things that I think surfaced at the end of the Demo Fest, the final panel, was this idea of, it's not just pre-sales automation, it's pre-sales amplification. We need to be able to do more. In fact, I even think of it as, think about the carpenters, right? When they went from hammers to nail guns, right? They could just do more. That's really what we're talking about here. Carrie, can you bring up the next one? As a leader, and I understand we have a number of pre-sales leaders, it's difficult to get full insight and visibility into the team activity, the contributions we're making, or the team is making, our performance. I think we have a sense, but it's hard to measure it, and it's hard to, quote, demonstrate to our leadership and other sales leaders what the team is doing. So that's another challenge that these tools are designed to address. Carrie? It's so critical for our sales counterparts to have a consistent experience when they engage with pre-sales. And so one of the challenges that these tools seek to address is an inconsistent opportunity execution, engagement model, delivery, messaging, etc. The more we can create a consistent approach, the more satisfied our sales counterparts are going to be, and the more consistently we're going to hit our numbers and close deals. Next point. In fact, one of the vendors calls the evaluation, quote, the dark side of the moon, meaning that, so often in the sales cycle, once we enter an evaluation, it's hard to get visibility into what really is the status. They tend to be unstructured, oftentimes poorly defined. We may have delays, but they're just not visible. And then we get to the end of the quarter and sales leadership is wondering, where are these deals? And account execs tend to say it's in evaluation, right? But what does that really mean? Are we 90% through the evaluation and there's just a few things that we need to be, checked off, or have we stalled and we just don't have visibility into that? So these tools are designed to add structure and force not only ourselves, but the prospects that we're working with to define a set of criteria and use cases and test cases and give that visibility into, quote, and shine the light on the dark side of the moon. I think we have one more bullet. Is that right, Carrie? Yeah. And then the lack of alignment between, quote, what we're calling field intelligence and product direction. What do we mean here? As pre-sales, as you all know, we're on the front line. We hear directly from customers what their requirements are, what they're looking for. And we can, if we're not bringing that back to our product teams, then chances are good that product is working on things that aren't going to generate revenue. In fact, I was talking with a client earlier this week, in fact, and we were, discussing the fact that who does product typically talk to? They talk to existing customers, and oftentimes they're talking to the admin folks within the existing customers. So what are they typically asking for? Enhancements to the administration and configuration and more of the back end. Yet we're talking to the buyers, right? We're talking to the people who invest in these solutions, and they're telling us what they're looking to spend money on. We need to close that gap between the knowledge that we get in the field and what product is prioritizing. The products and the solutions that we've looked at are also designed to address that challenge. Now, with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're calling the pre-sales landscape. To set some context here, folks, when Carrie and I started out on this journey, and it was a journey, I think it was, August of last year, Carrie, that we decided that we were going to embark on this project. And then I think we published it in April. So, that's 7-8 months of work. When we started out, we thought that we were going to categorize or organize the solutions that we evaluated in the context of sales motions. So there's qualification and discovery, there's introductory demos, there's solutioning, evaluations, et cetera. We thought that's how it was going to make sense to organize the solutions. What we discovered is that many of the solutions had capabilities in each of or most of the sales motions. We also looked at it from a management perspective, discovered that just didn't make sense. What evolved instead was an organization or a categorization of the products into these 5 buckets or these 5 focus areas, as we're calling them. Those 5 focus areas: pre-sales oversight and management, pre-sales opportunity execution, or what we're calling pre-sales opportunity execution, demo automation, response and knowledge management, and presentation and data solutions. Now, we'll take just a minute and break each one of these down. Carrie, I think I'll take the first 2, and maybe you can take a couple. So let's talk about pre-sales oversight and management. And as the name suggests, these are tools primarily designed for pre-sales leaders to do what? Things like team management and onboarding, enabling, and scaling pre-sales by putting those repeatable processes in place. The creation of playbooks and best practice definition and implementation. So we're all following the same set of pre-sales playbooks. Pre-sales activity and utilization insight. This gives us, as leaders, this gives us that insight, that visibility into where is the team spending the majority of their time, or what are we working on in deals that we're winning, and what are we working on, or what are we doing in deals that we're losing. Pipeline visibility and performance analysis. With all of the tools that fall into this bucket, we have an at-a-glance view of the pipeline, and most of them provide the ability to organize or filter those views by territory, by competitor, maybe by product, etc. And then what we're calling pre-sales master data management. What might this be? Products, accounts, customers. It might be demo assets, etc. A close cousin or a close relative to pre-sales oversight and management is pre-sales opportunity execution. And the difference here is that pre-sales opportunity execution is more for the direct benefit of the individual contributors. These are tools designed to literally let those of us out in the field manage our day-to-day activity, track our day-to-day data and information, specifically with all the opportunities that we're working. So what are some of the use cases here? Again, pre-sales opportunity, data capture and management. Many of the tools that we looked at in this space, or the solutions that we looked at in this space, they seek to be the one-stop shop, if you will, the one place, dashboard or workspace where pre-sales individuals, sales engineers have all their information about all their opportunities. This is where the playbooks defined in the first bucket are actually leveraged as structured pre-sales methodology and guidance. What's an example of this? If you're giving a demo of this product in this industry, right, in this context, here's the strategy or the demo plan and the pieces that typically are used for success. Task management and prioritization. So all of these tools have various ways of, as an individual contributor, I begin my day and I see my prioritized task list either for the day or for the week. Evaluation management, we were talking about that a moment ago, is whenever we engage or whenever an opportunity moves into the evaluation stage, we have a very structured plan. We capture our success criteria, use cases, test cases, etc. Product gap identification, analysis, and communication. So a moment ago in the last bullet in the challenges was the disconnect between field intelligence and product direction. The solutions in this space are designed to give us as individual contributors the ability to identify product gaps or gaps for an account, associate it to the revenue that is involved, and then send that into the product, whether that's Jira or whatever product management tool they are using. So product can actually prioritize enhancements based on revenue. And then internal and external collaboration. A number of the solutions in this space allow for requesting assists or requesting specialists to engage and keeps track of all that activity. Carrie, do you want to take demo automation?
I do. Thanks, Chris. So demo automation tackles a whole broad range of use cases, but it's ultimately, we could probably boil it down to focusing on getting buyers exposed to product earlier, more easily, and with better and more consistent delivery, right? And based on the number of vendors in this area, and you'll see that in the next slide, it's also arguably the most competitive area of this market. And while many of the vendors can address most of the use cases that are listed here, a lot of them take a slightly or very different approach to how they tackle these individual problems. Some focus on replicating product functionality, right, to give buyers a more controlled sandbox or trial type experience, or even replace this sort of demo instances that we're going to use for live demos where we're no longer reliant on a cloud or IT team to set those up. While others are focused more on providing a more prescriptive and interactive guided tour of their products using a variety of methods, including things like screen caps or even videos. And like many solutions, the data captured through their use can often be extremely valuable. And one of the less obvious advantages to these solutions is the ability to sort of organically discover new stakeholders in the buying team, because buyers are able to share these demo assets internally as they get shared from the pre-sales organization with them. And uncovering not only who those buyers are, but also what they care about based on how they interact with the demo can give sales and pre-sales teams a huge advantage when they do finally engage directly with those buyers.
And I'll just touch on response and knowledge management briefly. And incidentally, folks, when Carrie and I organized the work, when we did the report, he and I sat through all of the vendor presentations and demonstrations together, but then we organized the work, the actual write-ups in the way we're going through it. So I had pre-sales oversight and management and pre-sales opportunity execution. And by the way, most of the solutions in those are in both. So the solutions that support pre-sales oversight and management also support opportunity execution for the most part. And we'll look at that in just a moment. He took demo automation. I then took response and knowledge management. What's interesting is this, and really it's RFP automation is the way I think most of us think of it. This is actually a category that's pretty well established and much broader than just software. And so a number of these vendors have actually been in business for longer than many of the other, frankly, most of the others. Nonetheless, we included response and knowledge management in our study because for software vendors, for software companies, who is it that typically gets, quote, roped into responding to RFPs? It's sales engineers. So what are some of the capabilities that response and knowledge management offer, or the use cases, if you will? What we call sales intelligence creation, curation, and dissemination. What do we mean by sales intelligence? Well, it's the information that we typically need to provide to prospects as they're considering and evaluating solutions. By creating and curating and capturing this information, companies can ensure a consistent message. And that's really that next bullet there is end-to-end product messaging consistency. We want to establish sort of the party line for the most common asked and some of the more complex questions. Of course, just RFX automation itself. So a lot of RFPs come in the form of spreadsheets or Word docs, et cetera. These tools are designed to ingest those and organize them, allow the tools to actually do an automated mapping. And then from that, they can actually curate and generate documents to respond to those requesting prospects. They also have project management built in. For large organizations, these RFPs can be rather large projects involving numerous people. And for that reason, it also supports this notion of multidiscipline collaboration and coordination. Why? We might have sales involved in an RFP, marketing, finance, legal, tech, the technology folks, product folks, et cetera. These tools enable that multi-discipline, that cross-team collaboration. Carrie, do you want to take the last one?
Yeah, so this last category really entails a fairly broad set of solutions that focus on providing a range of benefits to improve how our presentations and demos are delivered, including things like helping sales and pre-sales collaborate more effectively during the presentations, which helps ensure more consistent messaging and demo delivery, providing a consistent interface to simplify how things like multi-persona and multi-solution demos are presented to avoid buyer confusion. If you have a consolidated or consistent interface, it looks like a simpler tool. And things like solving the sort of garbage data challenge that a lot of solutions face, where because they have time-sensitive or industry-specific or other complex data requirements, demos are really onerous to prepare for, or worse, they show non-representative data that doesn't properly convey how they work or represent what a buyer or prospect would actually see using it. And so they help actually inject the appropriate data into your demo models to make sure that you're reflecting the right and telling the right stories to really get the right messaging across to all your buyers. All right, so let's give a real quick view of what this looks like in terms of the vendors themselves. And as you can see, this market is getting fairly crowded. When we started researching vendors last fall for the Buyer's Guide, we found 24 who had paying customers and whose ICP or ideal customer profile was pre-sales. There's an innumerate number of additional vendors that are out there that have capabilities that benefit pre-sales, but we were really focused on ones where pre-sales is the ICP for the vendor. And less than 9 months later, we found no fewer than 10 additional vendors, and we continue to uncover new ones on an almost monthly basis. So this market is ever changing, and this slide is eventually going to run out of space, but it's already much busier than it was when we released the guide a couple months ago. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the guide itself. So we created the guide primarily for two reasons. For pre-sales organizations and buyers, our goal was to help leaders make better and more informed buying decisions. Our aim was to help you understand where you should consider investing in, navigate the options and players that could solve those particular areas and challenges, and understand the benefits that you should expect to better position that potential investment with sales and finance leadership in your organizations. And that last point is pretty critical, right? One of the biggest challenges shared by both the vendors and the buyers is figuring out how to justify the spend on these solutions. We in pre-sales have rarely held and rarely do hold our own budget, and therefore we need to sell the value and ROI internally. And unfortunately, aside from a few exceptions, there's not a lot of material out there on how to get buy-in from most sales leaders who, to this point, unfortunately haven't prioritized pre-sales, at least from an investment standpoint. On the other side of the coin, our goal for the vendors was to give them the opportunity to clearly articulate their positioning and raise their awareness within the community on an ongoing basis. And we felt it was really important for the guide to be written by those who understood the space, right? Both as individual contributors and pre-sales leaders, and had that experience so that we could adequately relate to the challenges that our pre-sales organizations are facing. Chris and I have both been in both of those shoes for the last 20 years, right? And so we felt we were in somewhat of a unique position to write this guide to be able to relate to everyone better. So the other thing we thought about too is that unlike most industry reports that are done like this, they're typically out of date by the time they're published. And so because of that, we chose to create the guide in a somewhat unique format. Rather than create a PDF or another distributable and static document, we felt that by publishing the guide online at presalebuyersguide.com as a website, we could much more effectively, right, reflect the rapidly changing dynamics of this marketplace. And in fact, it's kind of ironic in that literally an hour and a half after we released the guide, one of the vendors in this space announced a Series B raise. 15 minutes later, I had updated their profile on the guide. And so we feel that by releasing it that way, we're able to add new vendors and change vendor profiles as material differences make their way to us. So what is included in the guide? So for each of the 5 aforementioned sort of focus areas, they each have their own detailed review, and that calls out things like a description of what we believe that focus area includes, a list of the associated use cases and a description of what each of those are, the benefits you can expect to realize by investing in a solution in that particular focus area, a list of key capabilities that you should expect to see from the solutions in that space, and perhaps most importantly, what the top considerations are when you're evaluating vendors in that space. And then we obviously also include a list of vendors that we felt addressed each of those particular areas. Each vendor also had their own unique profile and detailed profile, included a whole bunch of things like their areas of focus and how they fit into the overall market, a client profile, so who should consider them as described by the vendor, what is the best profile of their type of buyer, the top use cases that they addressed in their own words as well, some of their noteworthy features and differentiators, which will help you determine why you should or shouldn't consider them, a list of their features and integrations, typical onboarding and implementation processes, as well as customer support, client support, right? You need to make a holistic decision on what you're buying. And so it's important not just to understand what functions do they solve, but how do they actually behave through their entire journey, your entire journey with them as a client. We include information on pricing models and how they price, not their actual pricing, because that changes, right? But for each of the vendors, the way that they price varies. And so we wanted to give an indicator of what their sort of licensing and other pricing approaches were. We included things like notable clients and case studies. We included a fairly detailed corporate overview and information summary, including all of their funding that they've ever raised. And then we also included some buyer review summaries from places like G2 and Capterra, so you can get an idea of what other users actually feel about the solutions. And so in terms of what wasn't included, because this is such a new market, we decided not to take the sort of Gartner market scope route and rank the vendors. We really felt that it was important to get at least the initial version of this guide out without necessarily pegging a specific vendor in a specific area, especially because everything's changing so rapidly, and we didn't want to tag someone in a particular category where a month later they might not be in that particular quadrant. So it does not include rankings, even though it does include a lot of commentary from us on what we thought of the vendors themselves. It also doesn't include really detailed feature comparisons. As part of our collection process, when we were going through this exercise with the vendors, Chris and I took very detailed, copious notes on the features that each of these vendors has, but we decided not to include them in the report. But we do have access to that data. So if you are interested in learning more about the specifics of each vendor, please do reach out to one of us. All right, so now let's drop into and start talking about some of the key observations that Chris and I found as we went through this process. Chris, do you want to start us off on these?
Sure, I'll be happy to. And before I do, I have to admit, Carrie, whenever I hear you go through the list of things that were included in the report, I must admit, I'm still, I think, a tad overwhelmed by how much is actually out there. And so I do want to let people know, and Carrie and I were chatting about this yesterday, quote, there's a lot of meat on the bone. So I do encourage you to spend some time in the guide. There is a significant amount of information out there. And I also encourage people to consider the focus areas first. Our vantage point is the best way to invest in this space, and really in your team, is to first consider where is the greatest value in terms of the focus area. Focus there, and then look at the tools or the solutions within that focus area. That being said, frankly, all the products that we looked at have some very impressive capabilities. I don't think there's a bad choice in the entire landscape of tools out there. It's really a matter of deciding, again, which capabilities or which of the use cases will benefit your organization the most, and then which of the tools align with your specific requirements. Next point, Carrie. The vendors that we looked at, and again, that list is growing, they really are to be commended for what they've done in many cases in a very short amount of time. One of the things that we have in the guide is actually a timeline of when these vendors were founded and formed, many of which within the past 3 years. Next, Carrie. And frankly, the market is changing very rapidly. We see what has happened in about 3 years. In three years from now, and Carrie mentioned this a moment ago, we will very likely run out of room in the quote the logo slide, because new vendors are entering the space, and even the vendors that we've already considered and reviewed and evaluated, they are changing their products and introducing new capabilities very quickly. Next point. One of the other interesting things that we discovered is that company maturity, and what I mean by company maturity, or what we mean by company maturity, is the number of years they've been in business, the number of employees they have, et cetera. It doesn't necessarily indicate product maturity, and vice versa. So we really, and I think the next point feeds into this, we really encourage, go ahead to the next point, Carrie. We really encourage people consider the product and the company and the people behind the product and driving the company. Many of these solutions and the companies were started and founded by pre-sales professionals who were looking for solutions for themselves, and they came up with such an effective methodology and tool for themselves that they decided to bring, create that into or turn that into a business and a sellable software solution. Next point. Some of the products do address some very niche use cases. I'm sure my French Canadian friend is going to make sure I say that correctly. While others address more broad or multiple use cases. So again, it's important to understand what your needs are, what you're hoping to accomplish, and then align the capabilities of each of those vendors. And I think, Carrie, I'll take a few more of these, and then I'll probably hand it back to you. And this and probably the next one, probably the last 2 points I'll make. Vendors, the vendors that we looked at, the solutions in the space, they do have a tendency to have a unique sort of understanding and interpretation of pre-sales processes, pre-sales requirements, and we'll get into the terminology in a moment. And I think what's unique about this is that let's consider CRM for a moment. And by the way, studies have shown that there are over 400 CRM solutions in the space. I've spoken with Nancy Narden, who has a platform called, I think is it Smart Selling Tools, something like that. But she estimates that there are 400 CRM tools. Now, if you were to look at any one of those CRM tools, more than likely, what are you going to see? You're going to see lead, account, contact, opportunity. The terminology is pretty well established. In this space, terminology is all over the map. And you want to go to the next slide? They have different taxonomies. They have different data structures, nomenclature. Even the term demo is used differently or refers to different things or different contexts in different tools. So it's really important to make sure that you understand the terminology that they're using when they say evaluation or opportunity or deal or what have you. So, Carrie, do you want to sort of run through the last few?
I do, thanks. So with any sort of newer set of vendors that are out there, you want to be very careful to clarify that what they're showing you is actually in the product and not future functionality. Some of the vendors have taken liberties, in some cases, some of the very newer vendors, obviously, and for obvious reasons, in sort of representing features that aren't necessarily in GA yet in their demos. So just be very clear to clarify with the vendors whether you just want to see stuff that's GA or to at least call it when things are not actually yet in the products. You're aware of what you're getting when you get it. Like anything else, if you've got garbage processes or you don't have any processes in place and you buy a solution in this space thinking it's going to magically solve your problems, it will not do that, right? The same thing around garbage in, garbage data out applies the same thing with your processes. And so it's really important that you sort of figure out what those processes are before you go and try and automate them with a vendor. I can't stress this part enough. Again, newer space, so not as much focus necessarily on the implementation, rather than just getting the features and benefits out there from a lot of these vendors. But implementation is super, super critical. We've talked to lots of organizations out there that have had false starts or outright failures with some of the vendors because their implementation teams aren't necessarily as mature as their sales teams are. And so one of the things that we've learned really quickly is that massive enterprise-wide implementations that try and solve this problem for hundreds of people in a pre-sales organization, if you have that many, tend to not work as well as when you sort of focus on a key department or a key unit and try and get a quicker win with a smaller, more defined scope of requirements, right? And then use that as a success story to then spread out across the organization. When you've got a very large pre-sales organization, you're going to have multiple different stakeholders, you're going to have multiple different opinions on what priorities are or how things should be implemented. It makes it a much more difficult process to do that smoothly. And that sort of expands into the next point that I just made there. So the other thing is around understanding like what your use cases are in terms of what is the biggest bang you're going to get for your buck. Chris talked about this earlier in terms of we think where the 5 focus areas is really going to help pre-sales leaders prioritize where you should invest. You really need to understand what are the specific use cases that are most important for you to solve. I'll give you an example. So I've worked with a couple clients, a couple pre-sales organizations evaluating demo automation vendors. Some of the demo automation vendors are amazing at the guided interactive tour type of demo automation. Some are really amazing at product functionality replication, but aren't necessarily great in the opposite. If you don't know which use case is important to you or more important to you, you're not necessarily going to know which vendor is the best fit. So make sure you're also prioritizing which use cases you want to prioritize internally before you go out to market to review the vendors. And then this last one is one that's sort of coming up more frequently. When we initially did the RFIs, a lot of these vendors, there wasn't a ton of real deep integrations into the existing tech stack and marketing stack. And I think that there's sort of 2 implications to that. One is that these tools, like any other, have to play really nicely with your existing stack. It's going to be much easier for sales ops or whoever's responsible for deploying these things if they automatically fit in with your other tools, or if it's going to be a massive challenge to sort of integrate them. The other is that a lot of the insights and analytics that these tools can drive are much more meaningful if they can also incorporate the data from the rest of your tech stack. So for example, it's really interesting to know for demo automation as an example, which particular prospects are looking at certain screens or certain pieces of functionality. But if you can then tie that to win rates, you then know necessarily maybe what to emphasize when you get into live demos or which features you should be talking about more even before that. So that's another consideration, is how well do they integrate with the existing tech stack, and that seems to be improving over time. So that was our presentation for today. We're very happy to open it up for Q&A. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about this, but do want to point out the buyer's guide is completely free. It was not a pay to play for the vendors. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible. It's also completely free and available for anyone that wants to try it out. All we ask is that you register an account on our system just so we know who you are. We do not spam people. We won't send you emails. We may send you a LinkedIn request to say hi, but that's about it. So feel free to go to Presales Buyers Guide and check that out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris and Carrie. That was super awesome information. Guys, as Carrie just mentioned, if you have any questions for them, you can pop them in the Q&A on the right side of your screen, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. I do see one in there right now. And the first question is, what surprised you the most when making the buying guide?
Do you want to take that first, Carrie?
Yeah, so Chris sort of alluded to this in our first, in the first point in that last slide, which is they may be really new, a lot of the vendors in the space, but the tech is really impressive. There is a lot of really awesome stuff that's out there. And a lot of these vendors are taking really creative approaches to solving these problems. These are tools that are not a nice to have, like they are very quickly going to become a must have because they do what they should. They have really impressive capabilities that are going to make both individual contributors and pre-sales leaders' lives a lot easier. So I think that was one of the biggest ones for me, was just how robust a lot of the functionality is in these tools.
Well, and to that end, if I can add to that, it actually makes the purchase decision difficult, because I think the more pre-sales leaders look into what's available and what's out there, the harder the decision is going to be. And frankly, that's why we'd like to believe that the buyer's guide is going to do just that. It's going to help pre-sales leaders make those, just sort of navigate the landscape and help them make some of those decisions.
Awesome. Cool. There's a question in here about like kind of how you guys decided to add these certain tools to the buyer's guide. So did you actually, when looking into these tools, did you run the tools in a production environment or did you just do like a demo sandbox lab environment? Like what was the...
Yeah, so we did not personally evaluate the tools in terms of using them ourselves. The process that we went through in the research process with the vendors was, we first approached the vendors to find out if they were interested in participating. Thankfully, there was an overwhelmingly positive response to that. The way that we then collected our information was, we started out with an initial sort of 75-minute, 90-minute interview with the vendors. And we spoke to mostly the C-suite to really understand at a high level, where do they see themselves? Where do they see the market? How do they see themselves fitting in? Who do they compete with? Why do they think they're different? Really to get a sense of their overall positioning, what they're trying to accomplish. And then the next thing we did was we sent out a very detailed RFI or RFP around everything around pricing models, implementation approaches, top customers, all of that sort of stuff. And then we followed all of that up with a prospect friendly or prospect ready type of demonstration from the vendors to Chris and I. So first, each of the vendors got 75 minutes. And rather than just come and do feature dumps on us, we asked them to present to us as though we were a buying prospect, so that we get a better idea not only of what the features and capabilities are, but how they were, at least the vendors envisioned them adding value to those organizations. So we saw a lot of detail around that. Obviously, Chris and I, with a fairly extensive history in pre-sales, were able to suss out where we saw, particular things that we wanted to dig deeper on or ask questions about. Are these things real? Are they GA, et cetera? How does this actually work, even if they didn't want to show it to us? But we did not personally use the products as part of the process.
Yeah. And the other, and Tommy, by the way, thank you for that question. That was a really good one. I have two other thoughts. The first is, frankly, we would love to, if we had the bandwidth, I think Carrie and I would love to actually get access to each one of those and spend some time working in them ourselves. We certainly don't have the bandwidth to do that, even with one, much less all of them. But that being said, and I'll address the gentleman who wrote the question, Tommy. It looks like you have some experience, working with some of these tools. For any of you, if you've worked with some of the vendors that we've studied, and you have some insights or feedback, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear from those of you out in the space that are starting to work with some of these products, either in a test environment or in a live production environment. And if you're discovering, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I mean, we would love to hear some of that. So we'd like to help sort of build the knowledge in this community as much as we can.
Love that. Awesome. Cool. Well, we're just coming up at the top of the hour. If anybody else has any questions, Chris and Carrie, I know, love to connect with folks on LinkedIn. So connect with them, and you guys can always ask those questions to them directly. Chris, Carrie, thank you so much for lending your time and expertise to today's session. It was so awesome to have you both, and we really appreciate it. We will be sending the recording of this session out to all of the registrants. So I saw that question come through a couple of times. So you guys will get first access, and then it will be publicly available on the website as well. So we'll be sure to share that with you. Thanks everybody for joining us. It was great to have you. We hope to see you in a few weeks at DemoFest X Salt Lake City. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sammy. Thanks all. Bye-bye.